Hello and welcome back. And before we start today's video, I've got a little question for you guys, whether you're the subs or you're someone just coming across this channel for the first time. Christmas 2021, we did a giveaway here on the channel of some of the stuff we've used in previous reviews. And prior to that, I did reach out to you and ask whether it was nobler in the mind to do a giveaway and give away some of that stuff to audience members, or whether I should utilize that equipment in future videos. And it's coming up to, we are in summer 2022, and I'm kind of pondering whether to do that again. Doing a giveaway, people like free stuff, of course they do. We're not mad, but at the same time, I have to admit that even after that first giveaway, a couple of the items that we gave away within a month of that, I was like, oh man alive, I could have used that for another video. I'm talking to you, Mr. TerraMaster. So I'm still debating whether to do another giveaway. It'll be a combination of hard drives and SSDs and a couple of NASs as well during summer 2022. But at the same time, I also have to appreciate that sometimes you guys would rather have more videos. We do a video here on the channel. So can you, if possible, let me know in the comments what you would prefer. We'll probably chuck a poll on the community page. But now I'm erring more towards doing the giveaway. But at the same time, I know a lot of people follow this channel for continued content and reviewed content here on the channel. So please, just wanted to put this on the beginning of the video because I know it's going to get quite a lot of views. Let me know what you think. Giveaway, or would you rather that hardware just gets put in the background and then pulled out periodically for future videos? But I think me and Eddie have got a video to do, haven't we? Let's crack on. Hello and welcome back, and that's right, I've changed location. Somewhere between that intro and this bit, all our camera equipment went nuts, so we had to move. I moved to this end of the room. We think it was on my side, but we'll have to wait and see. But this is about Synology 2023, and I know a number of you watching this have suddenly looked at your calendar, looked at your watches and gone, hang on, it's 2022. What the heck are you playing at? And that's absolutely right. But this is about Synology products that are aimed at the 2023 series. And generally what you find with that is that these products start arriving after about August or September. So unlike traditional Gregorian calendar, when it comes to Synology products, we have to work from the middle of the year. And in today's video, we are going to talk about several things. We're going to talk about some little rumours that got snuck under the rug to us very, very recently, along with a few predictions as we go along. Now, which ones are predictions and which ones are based on the rumours that we have received, which we have verified. And there are things that we unfortunately can't talk about right now that have not been verified, and hopefully we will be able to make a video on those in the coming weeks. But when something is a rumour or something related to a bit of information that was passed to us from a verified source, we will highlight it. And if something is a postulation, a prediction, a guess, if you will, we will highlight it as such. But this isn't the first time we've done a video like this, and it's me and Eddie the web guy there on my side there, I think. Eddie, we've done these prediction videos before. How, let's be straight up, how accurate are we?
I think we are pretty accurate, and the biggest help is actually from the QNAP, because somehow QNAP is doing all the legwork. And they are coming up with their new models and new specifications, new CPUs, which we can actually have ideas from. And that helps us to predict what Synology will do. And also Synology restrictive strands, when they are not giving everything what QNAP would, so we can also do that sort of predictions. But what stands there will be limitations.
It also allows us to track certain hardware through the channel or at production, and we can see a lot more information about certain processors or certain kind of builds or products that go under a different name, under things like FCC that we talked about before with the routers, and we will touch on that again later. It does allow us to track a lot of this information. So again, once again, when later on in this video, when we talk about some of the predictions, we will back that up with information that we have either garnered on the background or stuff that we've just visibly seen in the marketplace there. But let's face it, a number of you have come to this video for a very, very simple reason, and that is the 23 series of Diskstation. I think it would be fair to say that Synology have been largely prioritizing high-end business in the last 12, maybe even 18 months. We've not seen a lot of stuff in their lineup really targeting, the home user, the value user, even the prosumer user to a degree. SMB, small, medium business, high capacity enterprise, those have been very much the target demographic for them. And the first thing we want to talk about today is the Synology 23 Plus series, because once again, although we can't reveal the source of this information, we can talk a little bit more about what we've heard. And from what we can see, there's going to be a series of new disk stations. So this first part of the video, Eddie, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the DS923 Plus, the DS223 Plus, and the DS723 Plus. Eddie, over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. Time has gone really fast, and it's already been 2 years since 920 was released. So normally this is a cycle for Plus series, 2 to 3 years, and 2023 is very much expected now. People were expecting 2022 Plus, but
that's
as you
one
said,
of the things we got wrong. We got that wrong last time.
End of the year, and we missed the window. Now we will need to start talking about 23 series, which is more likely to happen now.
I mean, again, from what we can understand, although at the moment, we've sent information from 3 separate sources, only one of them I would consider stone cold reliable. And because of that, although there have been information kind of pointing at certain CPUs, I refuse to kind of highlight those sources because they're unverified at the moment. You wouldn't believe the kind of different spec of information. Just on a side note, really, one of the things you do find is a lot of people over in Taiwan that work at different brands do communicate, and often information we receive comes from their competitors, something I've never really quite wrapped my head around. So before we go any further, let's talk about a big question about the 923, because I'll tell you right now, we have no verified information precisely on the CPU right now of the 23 Plus series, or later on the standard ARM-based NASs as well that we'll talk about. But CPU-wise, Eddie, and again, I've got a little list of potential candidates in a 3-2-1 most likely, least likely fashion, but tell me right now, which CPU do you think the 923 and the 723 will arrive with?
I think it's going to come exactly with the same CPU what QNAP 64 series are coming out. A quad-core Celeron, just a newer generation. You know the numbers. You can tell me what exact model it is, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, the N5105, a quad-core 2.0 gigahertz processor that can be burst up to 2.7 gigahertz. It seemed like the obvious choice. There was a period during the pandemic when that CPU was kind of getting chopped and changed between different versions out there. There was the N5095 or 950i, but it looks like now the N5105 is pretty much the predominant production line CPU right now. Again, that is on my top 3 list. I will say before I go any further, can you postulate any other CPUs you can think of?
No, I wouldn't. No,
I
was thinking about
sticking with that one. Okay.
I was thinking about Ryzen being introduced, but I just can't see that happening because that would already push it out of the home market completely. That would be not multimedia friendly at all. So they would have no other NAS to sell for home users.
And you don't think the 1522 Plus and the RS422 Plus arriving with a Ryzen, that was the R1600, a dual-core processor there. Do you not think that might make you consider it?
No, that's terrible. That's a terrible NAS, terrible CPU.
Wow. We have very different feelings on that now. As I know we've discussed this already. Again, from a home and multimedia stance, I'll agree that CPU combination isn't exactly up there. But I think in terms of SME and business, I think it's got a lot going for it, particularly in those virtual threads. But, that's a debate for another video. But when it comes to the 723 and the 923, my 3 CPUs originally, if you'd have asked me, and indeed you have, about when we thought there was going to be a 2.2 series before we got this information, I would have 100% agreed with you. I think in my in our last prediction video, when we were talking about 2022 series, I did highlight that it was almost certainly going to be the N5105, but with the potential, with Synology thinking a bit into the future, that it would be another Intel-based CPU. And right now, because it's later in the year, I think that CPU that I postulated then is the more likely now, and it comes to a Celeron, and that is the J6412. Now, technically, it's actually a lesser CPU than the M5105. I know this is a bit train spot, but hear me out. It has a lower overall clock speed when you burst it up to 2.6. It also has slightly lower UHD graphic management there. I believe peaking at 800 megahertz with the alternative M5015 peaking at 850. The CPU does allow better scope in other areas, and on numbers, they're kind of even. But given the later release period and the fact that Synology have got a familiarity with that particular series, I think I'm prepared to give, in terms of future-proofing, Synology a little bit more leeway to think they would go for the J6412 because of the run on production lines over the next 2 years of these newer generation devices having to last for a few years, much like the DS920 that we talked about before. Obviously, my second choice CPU, it's going to be, much like yourself, the N5105. As mentioned, that CPU, another seller on there. But I think we have to at least acknowledge that Synology has been getting in bed with embedded Ryzens more and more. And I know someone's going to correct me and say it's Ryzen. And as we talked about several years ago when the first generation of Ryzen embedded Ryzen processors arrived on the market, there is actually a series of embedded graphics versions of those processors out there, and they utilize Vega R6 graphics. And these are of the same families of the V1000 and the R1000 series, but these have embedded graphics on board. They support QuickSync. They have a higher GPU handling crossing into the 1000 megahertz as well, compared with Intel Celeron. And when it comes to graphic handling, they're actually better than an embedded Celeron. Now, these quad-core and indeed dual-core processors with embedded graphics, Vega graphics, are actually, in some regards, better than their Intel contemporaries, not just in graphics, but also overall. And I think if Synology is doing more and more work with these Ryzen-based processors, it could be a case that they're going to move Intel-based processors towards Xeon at the top end, and they're going to utilize these embedded Ryzens, which are actually surprisingly efficient and have more lanes to play with, have more virtual threads as well. So the quad cores have 8 threads, the dual cores have 4, and I wouldn't be surprised if the new 23 plus generation in these prosumer quad-core boxes arrives with this Ryzen Vega processor in either the R1000 or V1000 there. So again, there's a lot to think about there in terms of those systems, and we haven't even touched on the 223 Plus there. What do you think is going to happen with that one? That's an interesting question. Eddie, what CPU's going in that?
It's definitely going to be dual core Celeron again. So QNAP 62, no, it's a 61st series, isn't it?
Oh, 62 series, yes.
62 series. So they come with Celeron, I think, N type of
it's the N4505.
Yeah, that's dual core Celeron. I think that's what's expected to be actually on the 2-bay Synology Plus series.
I think some might argue I'm giving Synology quite a lot of credit, because let's face it, the easy, and I think easy is probably not the right word, but the most straightforward, reliable, and easy transition is going to be these Intel processors that we're talking about here. I talk about highfalutin stuff with Ryzen embedded there and a larger overarching strategy, but now we don't know why the 22 series as it stands is being completely skipped over, which is really weird to me, unless they're going to hold out all the way until next September, which I just can't see them doing, and particularly based on the information we've got. Then if they're, the 223 Plus, you're right, because unless they go dual-core Ryzen, quad-core Ryzen, within those respective families, going with a V and then an R into the dual and the quad, you're absolutely right when it comes to the Intel. There isn't really another dual-core Intel in the market that they could opt for. I mean, we are also ignoring the potential that Synology could so easily do what they have done before and utilized the previous generation prosumer hardware and then moved it into the middle road pack. They just reuse the same hardware, but they place it in a new area of the portfolio, if you know what I mean. We saw that with the Plays and the Standard series. We've even seen it with the Js to a degree, where the previous generation higher tier simply becomes the middle tier. So it could simply be the case that the 223 Plus utilizes the previous generation quad core, but we don't know, and I do think the run on those with Intel was a lot more limited there. But overall, that's what we think about the 223 Pluses, and I think now we should move on to another cheeky little Diskstation, shouldn't we? Leading neatly on to the value series, the cost-effective tier from Synology. Yes, that is right. When it comes to their portfolio, one range that I reckon needs so much attention, it is unreal, is the value and the cost-effective tier. Indeed, short of a few J series boxes in the interim, which have only reused the old specifications, the old Realtek RTD1296, the value series from Synology, the DS118, the DS218, the DS218 Play, the DS4, those systems are insanely overdue for a refresh. They used to be regular as clockwork 2-year refreshes. Now, based on the same information we received before, the only value series NASs that were brought to our attention were both 2-bays, the DS223j and the DS223. Once again, we got a separate packet of information detailing CPUs, and I strongly did not believe it to be real. The other reason that is not here on the channel, not even that it's a verified source. But for you, Eddie, when it comes to a 2-bay value series, that's the J and the standard, what processor are we looking at? And do you know what? Throw some memory in there as well.
Yeah, exactly. These are long overdue. And one of the J series, I think it's 120J, isn't it? It still runs on DDR3 memory, so that's long overdue to be replaced with DDR4 memory. CPU, I think one of the reasons why they haven't refreshed that value series range is obviously pandemic. So there was no people actually in the factory producing all these NASs, so it's easier just to keep it the old way. The other thing is they heavily rely on Marvel and Realtek CPUs. They haven't upgraded their ranges either, these CPU companies. So what I'm thinking, I would put my bet on Realtek CPU called RTD3095. You can find this CPU in NVIDIA Shield TV. Yes, it's not new CPUs, it's fairly old, but it is better than their existing Realtek CPUs. So that would support H.264, H.265, 60-bit transcoding for 4K and HDR content. So I think they will put this CPU in there.
Wow, I'll say straight away, I did not think of that CPU. And as soon as you said it, in my brain, I was like, can I write that on my notes over here? No, I mean, I've got 3 different CPUs here, and none of them are that CPU, to be straight. I'm going to throw my phone on the other side of the room. Just in case anyone was wondering about that noise earlier, I just won myself a deck chair on eBay. But that's another story. But any other CPUs, or are you committed to that one?
They might use some QNAP based ARM-based CPUs, but I'm not sure about
that. The one they're using at the moment is the A55. Which is it's a 64-bit ARM processor there. It's pretty good. Again, it is on my list. And I think the only reason I've not committed to that one is it's a relatively recent CPU. And with the value series, Synology has tended to go for a CPU that's got a couple of, maybe even 2 to 3 years under its belt as it stands. And that's the only reason I'm not thinking it's going to be that A55. The other 2 CPUs I've got here, one of them is very, very new, but it's also being purchased in quite high quantities right now, and the other one is a very old CPU by comparison, but it's also very familiar to the Synology architecture. The first one is a Marvell Octeon, and that is the CN9130, a quad-core 2.2 GHz ARM 64-bit processor there. And again, this is very much of that model, but it doesn't have, as you mentioned, that 4K support. It doesn't have a lot of that kind of multimedia support there. And I think the only reason I'm erring slightly more against that is just because it's quite new. I think it's a 2021 released processor there. Alternatively, we've got an Annapurna CPU, the AL324 or AL314, and this is a CPU, a particular architecture that Synology do have experience with. And it is a quad-core ARM 32-bit there, the A57. And again, I think that's more likely for me just because the brand has a little bit more experience on it. That CPU that you postulated there, that Realtek, that does have some age behind it. And you are making me sort of think a little bit that I should have put that on my notes there in the background. I think both systems are almost certainly going to use the same CPU, but I think it's going to be, once again, a question of how much memory is inside. Synology have got a bit of a history of that. Again, we go back to the value series in the 218, 118, and 218 Play and the 418, and what we saw was the same CPU on all 4 NASs, but that CPU had a different amount of DDR4 fixed memory to it, much like you stated there. So I think that's going to be the case on the J and the standard 2 bays there. I think maybe it will be 512 megabytes and 2 gig respectively of DDR4 there. The only thing I would say against that is DSM7 is quite a hungry little beast. And when DSM 7.1 came out, and it was supported on the likes of the DS223j and stuff like that, it ran on them, but it has to be said that the amount of memory consumption straight away off the bat was pretty hefty. And I think we have to at least examine the idea that with these CPUs, that Synology, as much as they might want to differentiate the releases in terms of memory included, DSM7 is hungry enough that I think 1 gig minimum should really be the standard now for any Synology release, and hopefully the brand themselves have highlighted that. But one thing we've not talked about, and I'm going to throw over to you in just a moment, is network connectivity. This seems to be a conversation that has dogged Synology Home and Diskstation, and particularly prosumer and home releases for a while. So I'm going to put it to you right now. We've talked about 5 NASs thus far: the 923, the 723, the 923 Plus, the 223 Plus, the 723 Plus, the 223j, and the 223. Do you think 1 gig, 2.5G, 10G, optional 10G? Go with it. What do you think?
I think that there's still nothing they're going to do, even though nowadays internet has become faster than local network, especially with 5G, which is faster than gigabit, and optical internet, you get also 1 gigabit lines. It's already faster than a NAS, but Synology, I think they will not give in, not yet.
You think they'll stick with, even though the router had 2.5G recently, you don't think that's at least a little bit of the weakening on that stance?
Yeah, because when they released their 1522 series, they're supposed to be 2.5 gig ports. All they did, they put a slot for 10 gig card. That's all they did. So I think that's an indicator.
So you think, okay, so do you think we're going to see that slot in the newer generation 23 pluses?
It could be on 5 bays. On new generation 23 plus 5 bays above, they might start introducing this because they're already embarrassing themselves with their 1 gigabit ports, really.
But do you not think on the
not 2 bays, not 4 bays? I don't see that.
But do you think that is the brand not including it for reasons of cost effectiveness and trying to keep it within a certain price point, or do you think it's the brand trying to differentiate the 4 bay and the 5 bay?
I think they're just thinking how to make money on upgrades, so that's why they're introducing all these upgrade ports. So they did that with 10 gigabit mini port. Maybe they'll figure out how to upgrade with 2.5 gig, and then they'll start cashing in.
I assume that you feel that the value series, that's going to be 1G regardless?
Definitely. Definitely. J series, they're not going to make 2.5 gig ports now.
And once again, do you think that's a cost-effective thing? Because the one thing I will note is all the CPUs that I postulated, and I can't speak for the one that you mentioned there because I've not dug deep into the data sheets on that one, but the CPUs that I've talked about, the reasons I focused on those is all of them do support 10G, 2.5G, and 1G in their chipsets. They do on their architecture there. So
that one also supports that RTD 1295. I think I said.
Of all the things,
also supports 2.5 gig, but just can't see that happening.
One of the things I look forward to in these prediction videos, because genuinely, after we record prediction videos like this, I go back to the old one and I rewatch it mere hours before we do this. And one of the things I like seeing is when one of us is right or wrong, but not just right, but vehemently right. And I know network connectivity is a giant area of difference between us, because I genuinely feel that Synology this time around are going to change from 1G. I think I think you're bang on the banana when it comes to the value series. I think they're going to be 1 gig all the way. There's going to be no movement on that whatsoever. But with the Plus series, maybe not the 223 Plus, but I think either the new 2 and 4 bay are going to have support of that new 10G adapter because of its more refined, by refined, I of course mean scaled down. I think that refined nature of this means that 4 bays, again, like the DS920, are going to be able to occupy and upgrade towards 10G without utilising too much of the chipset and the PCI lanes inside. Maybe not as much on the 2 bay system there, but definitely the 4. And the other thing I will highlight is Synology adding 2.5G for the router, that 6600AX, and we'll talk a little bit more about routers later on. They added that, I believe, because obviously the last thing you want is your internet speeds with greater than gigabit internet speeds out there to outpace that of your local area network. So there was necessity there. They've clearly looked at this system and gone, there is a necessity for it. And Synology tends to only go down a road when it comes to adding features to products when it is true and tested, or there is very clear, presumably market research led demand. And right now I do think we have crossed into that tipping point for 2.5 GBE, or at least greater than gigabit network connectivity. So I genuinely believe that in the 23 plus series, the 7 and the 9, I do think there's either going to be that upgrade card there, because that's a lot of R&D to go into an upgrade that's barely going to get used in many systems. Plus that, or they're going to go with 2.5 GBE on there. I genuinely believe that for those systems. Not for the other ones, but that's really it for those Plus series devices. I think the USBs will still be 3.2 Gen 1. You know, I think expansions will be the same. But that's, for me, the big upgrades that are going to happen in the Pluses. So that takes us neatly through the Diskstation information. Now we're going to talk about something a little bit more postulative, but based on little bits of information that Eddie has received over from the East, back and forth. But once again, what we're talking about here is a little bit more in the kind of speculative territory there. So a little bit less credence in this, but this is still based on little grains of information. Eddie, this is largely your baby. Roll with it.
Yeah, that's going to be about Wi-Fi 6. So as you know, they just released the RT 6000 series mesh router, which is Wi-Fi 6 ready, and it has higher frequency compared to other routers. But what they do not have replaced is MR series NAS, which are still running on Wi-Fi 5, and RT 2600, which is also Wi-Fi 5. So they managed to work them together as a mesh point, but the technology behind it doesn't allow it to work as a Wi-Fi 6 mesh. So instead of sending multiple beams out from the router, it says just one simultaneous stream from those mesh points. So it's not good. So we've been talking to Taiwan guys, and they are actually preparing something like our 3000 AX series mesh point, which is going to be actually replacing these MR old type of routers. So you can have true Wi-Fi 6 mesh system and instead of those old Wi-Fi access points, if you could say.
I did wonder that when we first talked about the 6600 AX, as you know, even when they enabled SRM 1.3, you're still funneling a Wi-Fi 6 router into Wi-Fi 5 points. If you're in like a big business, whether it's a hotel or a multi-story business, that Wi-Fi connectivity, you lose out on that Wi-Fi 6, because obviously Wi-Fi 6 as well, not just if you're going to take advantage of the 5.9 gigahertz band and enjoy it on its own, it's got a smaller area of coverage compared with Wi-Fi 5 anyway, and you're bringing in the coverage zone. So having those mesh points and Wi-Fi 6 to have that larger speed when they are connectable makes sense in many ways. I feel like I should also highlight as well, when Eddie does mention there about information, none of this information comes directly from Synology Taiwan. All of this comes from people in that region and within the industry. So again, that's why we call this a rumoured area here, because that 3000 AX, and we still don't know whether it's an RT 3000, we don't know if it's an MR 3000 AX. All we know is it is the word being thrown around, and maybe it will change, is 3000 AX. And although it's not Synology themselves, there is no confirmation from the brand. They may even drop this during production, because we have mentioned before that the 6600 AX, although the time between its first mention at Synology 2021 event, 2022 event, and eventual release was relatively short compared with other Synology routers, it existed on FCC test, it existed as a model ID for an exceptionally long amount of time. That 6600 AX, its development cycle was seemingly very, very long compared to what we eventually saw in the eventual announcement and release there. So 3000 AX may not happen, or if it does happen, it could be a very quick announcement release schedule there. But yeah, definitely an upgrade to the 2200 AXs should happen. It seems mad to me that you've got a Wi-Fi 6 router and you haven't got, supported mesh points. I mean, you are an advocate of Synology routers anyway, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. They have lovely operating system for family filters and limiting internet speeds and blocking outside intruders and firewalls. They got a really good system.
I mean, half the reason you didn't upgrade your 26... I mean, I think we talked about this in the previous video, or at least I know we talked about it relatively recently, that you didn't upgrade your 2600 AC, even though you've got several mesh points, simply because if you upgraded that central one to the 6600 AX, it didn't matter to the rest of your mesh. You know, kind of defeat the whole object of that. And I do think that's another logical step why Synology will go with this 3000 AX. I think it will eventually see release there. But let's move on to our next subject, which leads us neatly towards accessories there. And this is another area where me and Eddie have been in conflict for quite a while. And I think it's long overdue for a particular hardware release from Synology that I say practically every year for the last 2 or 3 years that Synology are going to bring. And then Eddie immediately disagrees with me. So get ready to hear Eddie agree with me quite a lot. But, and again, this is completely based on speculation. This one, I have zero information on this. But Synology switches. Why is that not a thing yet? It must be coming close to being a thing. It's the obvious area of their portfolio that they haven't touched on there. They've got the router, they've got the router software, they've got so much experience in this field, and they still have to recommend people use Netgears and stuff like that. Eddie, how do you feel? Do you think Synology will release switches?
No, never. Never. It just doesn't make sense. You can't make profit on switches, because switches are just simple dumb boxes just switching the lines across the network. That's all it does. So that's why they ask people to buy them from Netgear and other places, because they are manufacturing thousands of these units every day, so they could bring these costs down, because switch never supposed to be expensive. It's really a basic switching board. That's all it is. You might say like, oh, why wouldn't they make smart switches with some sort of operating system on it, which also makes no sense, because they already have routers, because routers are the like mothership for these switches. Switches are just as an accessory for the router to add additional ports. So all the brain will always live actually on the router itself. So that's why switches can be made by any company. Whoever can make them cheaper, the better. So I don't think Synologies are interested at all.
What you're witnessing there, audience, is a conversation that me and Eddie have had, I would say, about 10,000 times, sometimes in the pub, sometimes on the phone, because I fundamentally disagree with most of what he said. I think because Synology has such a heavier business focus, and they're releasing more and more 10G solutions in their enterprise sector, I think them trying to ascertain and become this one-stop solution provider, an entirety. They've got their media, they've got routers, they've got the NASs, they've got the upgrade cards, they've got all these little bits and bobs coming in. I think it is inevitable that Synology will release a switch. You're right, they can be done affordably, they can be brainless, but I think they will approach switches in the same way they approached routers. And I think what we will see, we won't see a dumb Synology switch. I reckon we'll see a smart Synology switch. And I said this is probably the second year I've said this, but I'm convinced by it, because it seems such a no-brainer when producing a solution. Hell, they include the cables for these solutions. It seems like an obvious gap in there. And again, there are other obvious gaps, and we're going to lead on to that in just a moment, because although I've got my full weight behind switches, and I've said that for a few years, Eddie, on the other hand, I believe, and I'm going to go how I feel this conversation always seems to go, tell me the accessory that you think Synology will release.
So imagine Synology cameras.
Yeah.
Because they have already invested in their DVR boxes, in their surveillance, artificial intelligence software in those boxes. They are ready for the cameras. All they need to do is just stick their label, one of the existing cameras. That's it, and call it yours. That's it. I
mean, again, I see the logic behind it, and I think over the last, I would say 2.5 years, we have had the odd rumour from time to time from the East that Synology is examining the idea of cameras, and because of this, we often do reach out to Synology and do kind of request to them either, what is your recommended camera brand, or, will Synology ever delve into cameras? And we often hear the same two replies, almost like there's a company line on it. The first one is that they never really put their weight behind any one camera brand, outside of a live event where you do see them showing off their devices, and you generally find they're using some real top tier camera equipment. You don't really see lower tier ones like your Edimaxes and stuff like that, or Hikvision. You sometimes see Hikvision, but even then they go for the real enterprise level stuff there. But when it comes to whether they'll ever entertain cameras, they always kind of say it in a kind of now not at this time. And you do feel that the brand has examined this time and time again. And I think, as you say, although I used to disagree with you on this, I think now we're seeing them heavily invest in Surveillance Station 9, for example, there, and seeing them invest in this AI stuff. We've now seen their 2-bay, which doesn't seem to have embedded graphics. It doesn't seem to have a graphics card. It's completely powered by embedded graphics. It seems like they are finding ways to be more efficient with their camera software to be more universally available. And with that Surveillance Station platform being so popular and so fully featured for the price tag as well, that along with camera licenses, now I would think would be a good time for them to go down that road. And although, once again, we do hear about cameras and Synology dancing the dance as a subject from the East, it's never really been completely foolproofly underlined there for us. But if ever it was going to happen, now's the time it's going to happen. Let's be realistic about that. But if we're going to talk about accessories, we can talk about another accessory that Synology has been making waves on for quite a while. Let's talk about hard drives. Eddie, where do you think things are going to go with Synology and hard drives in the 2023 generation? I'm going to assume that everything we're going to talk about now is largely conjecture, but I think there is a few nuggets of stuff that we've noticed as well. So Eddie, hard drives and Synology, boom.
There's not much they can choose to do, because all they do is they're selling Toshiba drives and sticking their labels on it. So every time Toshiba will be releasing a bigger drive, Synology will be releasing a bigger drive. The other thing what they could do is turn the back to the consumer and actually start producing value series drives, not producing, but relabeling those Toshiba value series drives, which are made for 4-bay units or 6-bay units, something underneath 8. So in that case, they could actually start selling their drives for things like 922 or 923 or whatever day is going to be the next 4-bay coming out, because they did that with 2422 plus series, which they said they'd never do, but they did. So that could be a prediction that in the future they might actually release consumer-based hard drives instead of enterprise type of drives, and start sticking them into consumer boxes.
Okay. I mean, again, I do think if we rewind to the start of the year when we did do a video on Synology being quite strict in their support of third-party drives, they have softened on that in DSM 7.1, and my kind of checks throughout using third-party drives, I think I did a dedicated video on it around about 4 or 5 weeks ago. It does look like all of the features of third-party drives and first-party drives have reached parity. They're the same. There's only a few things like firmware updates on Synology drives and stuff like that that aren't available, understandably so, to third-party drives there. But I think, and this is something we've talked about in the last few videos, that idea of Synology releasing a standard class drive, I think it's getting increasingly likely. Now, once again, this is not based on any real information we've received, but when you look at the compatibility list of the most recent 2 releases, the RS422 Plus and the DS1522 Plus, and you look at that hard drive compatibility, you do see some weird omissions. If you'd watch my review on my Before You Buys on those, for example, on the RS422, at least at the time of recording then, perhaps things have changed, and I will check before this video is out, and if not, there should be a disclaimer if what I'm about to say is no longer correct. But the RS422 didn't list WD drives. It was really odd. It listed Seagates, it listed Toshibas, and it listed Synologies and a few others, but it didn't list the WD Reds, which was really odd. But the 1522 with the same CPU, very similar memory, same network connectivity, and that upgrade as well, a 5-bay, not a 4-bay, did list WDs, did list Pros, did list a lot of drives, although still not all. It was a very tailored compatibility list compared to the 422, which, although both of them did arrive with some support of different third-party drives, and more than the the DS223 that you highlighted there, it did seem like a weirdly crafted, almost tactically crafted compatibility list, and it erred towards this idea that Synology are looking at each area of their portfolio and going, Yep, that is a rack mount. Oh, we're not going to put those drives there. So you're right, and I think this continues to add credence to the idea of Synology releasing a standard class drive. Looking at the naming structure, it would have to be, looking at, they've gone with their naming conventions, the HAT 3300 or the HAT 3100 perhaps, or 3110, because maybe the year generation there on the end will change. But although we've got no concrete information on that, we do have a vibe that that is the way Synology are going to go on this. Indeed, you mentioned the Toshiba releasing newer generation and Synology perhaps adopting those. Toshiba released an 18 TB and a 20 TB in the last year in the MG09 and MG10 series. So that's another prediction. I agree with you there that they'll probably release an 18 and 20 TB version of Synology enterprise hard drives, which is long overdue, because I don't know if anyone else has noticed on a lot of their new releases. I'm sorry I'm over talking you. I'm sorry, man. But on the compatibility listings, why do they not list higher than 16 TB on their NASs? If I had to put that to you straight away, Eddie, why do you think Synology doesn't add higher than 16 TB on any of their compatibility lists?
Because they haven't they haven't added any bigger drive themselves. They haven't released a drive of that size. So simply that's the limit for that very reason.
It seems weird, doesn't it? I mean, again, that seems very intentional. And, you know, the day before recording this video, what is it, the 20th of July, I think it's 10 o'clock in the morning here. Yesterday, WD revealed their 22 TB hard drives in gold, purple, and red. And actually, I touch on purple there. Synology did list all of the purple drives, presumably because they are dedicated surveillance drives with a heavier focus on write over read. So there's a good chance we will see Synology release a surveillance hard drive in that same vein. I think it'll be really interesting to see if they do that. I mean, again, I think we're going to wrap things up here for the video. I'm sure on the time bar it'll tell you if that's true or false. But can you think of anything else that you think Synology might touch on in the 2023 generation?
I don't know. They might add some sort of USB adapters to add this 2.5 gig maybe connectivity.
It's an optional, yeah. Like yep.
Something like that, maybe.
You can pick those up now for like $20, $30 right now. I think even
exactly.
The 5G
stick your label
adapters,
on it and sort it.
I mean, it's potential. I think it would still have to. It might go into conflict with Synology not adopting 2.5G as well. I mean, if I had to go, and again, this is where we're going to end this video on massive predictions here, because this is genuinely what I'm going to say is based on one, just going by model releases and their history, and two, simply based on release rhetoric and the times of year that these things drop. I think we almost certainly will see a 1623 plus. I think we'll almost certainly see an 1821 plus, and I think it will arrive with that Ryzen that we saw in the 1522. Either that or the next generation up of the V series there. I don't think there'll be embedded graphics on those, and again, this is pure postulation there, but I do think that is something we will see, because those systems have always had an incredibly strict 2-year policy. And although we're seeing or at least based on the information we've received, that the 23 Plus series is a thing and therefore breaking that convention, which isn't unusual. We've seen it before with the 2415 and the 215 Plus series. They have broken those convention rules before. I think in the case of that 6-bay, that 8-bay, I can't see them breaking that convention, and I think we probably will see a 23 series on those. But this has been predictions and a few little rumours that we've heard there in the background for Synology 2023. Let me know what you think in the comments, and do please address that question that I mentioned in the intro to this video where we were talking about giveaways, because again, look behind me, we do reuse a lot of the equipment for these videos in further content, but we also know that people quite like giveaways and we're running out of space. So it is really a case of, do you prefer? Just let me know. One, do you think we should continue utilizing things that we have here for future content, or we should give them a deadline and then just do a giveaway for them to the subs? But let me know in the comments. Eddie, can you think of anything we've missed in today's video?
No.
Wow, oh, he is spot on, Johnny on the spot there, isn't he? Thank you so much for watching. Do let us know if you think we've missed any points, any predictions that you want to make when we revisit this video. You look great and we look like fools, or vice versa. Let's find out. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Use the free advice section linked in the description. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe to learn more, and maybe when we do an update to this, we'll let you know what we were right and wrong about. But other than that, Eddie, thank you so much for coming on today's video. You guys for watching, thank you so much. And I guess we will see you next time. Bye.